It's 10 o'clock. Now, Fox 35 News at 10.
We now have the final word on the police officer accused of breaking the neck of World War II veteran Daniel Daly. The Orlando Police Department is defending their officer. They say Officer Travis Lamont did nothing wrong when he used a technique to subdue Daly last month, a move that broke the man's neck. The report reads, quote, due to the sudden aggressive actions by the subject, coupled with the subject's statement of intention to, quote, knock out this cop, I find the officer's use of hard control technique to be the appropriate response in keeping with department policy. The OPD Internal Affairs investigation case is now closed. Here to talk about this with us tonight, the cop doc, former police chief Dr. Richard Weinblatt, and editor-in-chief of Orlando Magazine, Michael Boslett. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for coming in.
Hi, Amy.
Good evening.
Mr. Boslett, let's start with you. Your thoughts on the outcome of OPD's investigation?
Well, I think it's predictable that they would have found that the cop used justifiable force. That doesn't surprise me at all, nor does the outcry over this.
Dr. Weinblatt, Mr. Daly's attorney says OPD did not talk to all the witnesses in the case. Should they have?
I would think so. I would think so. And as I read the report, it looks like they did make contact with a couple. They mentioned verbal statements and a few that they had verbal and written statements. But did they get to everybody? Doesn't appear so. And I'm not aware of whether they did.
Should they have Mr. Boslett talk to everybody in the case to make a fair judgment, or do you think they just kind of went off what the officer said, and obviously there was another officer there as well?
Well, it sounds to me like they did go by the officer's statements, and that was dominating their review of it.
Mr. Boslett, you said in your column in Orlando Magazine that you didn't think the state attorney's office should have dropped the charges against Mr. Daly. If people will remember, they originally were going to charge with Mr. Daly with several charges against the officer. Turns out they dropped those. Why do you feel that way?
Well, because I think he did commit a crime. I mean, he was disorderly. I believe there probably was battery on the police officer. I was surprised at how quickly they did drop that. You know, there's ample evidence to show that Mr. Daly was belligerent and aggressive on that evening, and he was intimidating to some people.
Dr. Weinblatt, your thoughts on that?
Well, he was intimidating some people, true, but there were also some people that were saying that basically he was harmless. Was he kind of spouting off and everything? Yes. I mean, here's the thing we have to remember, and unless you've been in the shoes of somebody dealing with difficult folks as a uniformed law enforcement officer like I have, it's hard to understand this stuff. And we deal with difficult people in law enforcement. That's what we do. That's part of the job description. Now, does it mean that Mr. Daly is excused? No, but it also means that we need to be prepared for what difficult people do and not just respond with a tactic that, while by policy it seemed fine, when you look at it, you sit there and go, was it really? And that's a big question mark there. And it's telling what Chief Deming said in her statements, where she said that the officer did okay according to the parameters of the policy, but they're going to review that policy and review that training. So that gives you another little question mark there.
Right. And Mr. Boslett, you've really taken sort of a middle-of-the-road approach on this as far as your opinion, because you're saying, you know what, the officer is not completely to blame here, that Mr. Daly needs to share some of the responsibility.
I think the events leading up to that culmination of the tragedy, of course, the man receiving a broken neck, which is extremely severe, for this case, Mr. Daly does bear some responsibility for that evening. Time and again, he made bad decisions that night. His actions were very hostile towards some people, including the police officer. I think the police officer on several occasions tried to give Mr. Daly the chance for this not to go this route. In other words, not for it to be an arrest in this case. And in fact, the tow truck driver told me that night that the officer said right to Mr. Daly's face, you know, nobody has to go to jail here tonight.
Right.
Go about your business. And it continued to escalate.
Well, we certainly agree that we certainly appreciate both of your opinions. Dr. Weinblatt and Mr. Boslett, thank you again so much for coming in.
Thank you, Amy.
Good evening.
We should mention Daly's attorney, Mark Niejames, says the report is absurd and that the officer did abuse his power. Niejames is filing a lawsuit against the Orlando Police Department on Mr. Daly's behalf.